also pointed out issues between Jeanie Buss and LeBron James.
For the first time, the guarded silence of the Lakers owner was broken, exposing her raw, unfiltered perspective on LeBron and the controversial arrival of his son, Bronny. This revelation forces us to completely re-examine the mythology of the NBA's first father-son duo, because in the shadows of the locker room, the atmosphere was far more toxic than the cameras ever captured. It was the report that brought the entire franchise to its knees. In January 2026, a piece of journalism landed with the weight of a sledgehammer, tearing down the curtain that had shielded the Lakers' internal chaos from the public eye. What lay beneath that curtain was not just organizational dysfunction, but a tangle of human emotions so messy, intricate, and deeply personal that it stunned even the most cynical observers of the game. The architect of this revelation was none other than Baxter Holmes, a name that resonates with a specific frequency among those who treat the NBA not just as a sport, but as a religion. As one of ESPN's premier investigative minds, Holmes operates differently. He doesn't simply report the news. He excavates it from the buried depths where secrets are meant to rot, reaching places most writers are barred from entering. Consequently, when his byline appears, the basketball universe essentially freezes in place, collectively holding its breath to absorb every single word he has put to paper. On January 21st, 2026, he released a dossier that didn't just ripple through the league. It sent absolute seismic shockwaves crashing through the foundations of the sport. The piece bore the heavy title, How Buss Family Infighting Drove the $10 billion Sale of the Lakers, a headline that promised a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. It served as a comprehensive autopsy of the decades-long resentments, the Machiavellian power struggles, and the internal rot that had plagued the ownership group. These bitter blood rivalries within the Buss dynasty ultimately forced the unthinkable, the sale of the crown jewel to billionaire Mark Walter, the Dodgers co-owner, for a staggering valuation of $10 billion. To be clear, the internecine warfare within the family was compelling enough on its own to sustain a multi-part, prestige documentary series on a major streaming platform. We are speaking of a narrative where siblings wield knives against one another, engaging in clandestine coups and the ruthless termination of their own flesh and blood to secure the throne. The level of dysfunction on display was so profound and theatrical that it would leave even the most experienced architects of reality television staring in disbelief, scrambling to capture the madness. Yet, buried deep within that labyrinthine investigation lay a revelation that managed to eclipse even the destruction of the Buss family legacy, capturing the public's imagination instantly. It was the unearthing of the true, unvarnished thoughts of Jeanie Buss, the steward who has steered the purple and gold ship through the turbulent waters of the modern era. This was the woman who carried the torch through the post-Jerry Buss vacuum, holding the franchise together by a thread, and we finally learned how she truly viewed the titan known as LeBron James.
The Lakers are having a strong start to the season, sure. However, things off the court might not be as strong.
According to the detailed reporting from ESPN, the reality behind the scenes was not just strained. It was deteriorating far more rapidly than any external observer could have possibly hypothesized.
The story also pointed out issues between Jeanie Buss and LeBron James.
The report alleged that in private moments, Jeanie harbored deep resentment toward what she perceived as James's monumental ego and the suffocating grip that he and Klutch Sports tightened around the organization's throat. Klutch Sports, the powerhouse agency commanded by Rich Paul, represents both LeBron and Anthony Davis, effectively consolidating an empire within an empire. This unique positioning granted them a terrifying amount of leverage, allowing them to dictate the franchise's trajectory and decision-making processes at virtually every single level of operation. It became increasingly clear that Jeanie detested this dynamic. She felt as though the hierarchy had been inverted, her legacy hijacked by external forces, leaving her powerless in her own boardroom. But the animosity ran deeper, spiraling into something far more personal. The report indicated she despised the narrative that painted James as the Messiah, arriving to salvage a sinking ship in 2018. She resented the perception that he had graciously chosen the Lakers, rather than the world acknowledging the front office's competence in securing his signature, a perspective that requires a moment of serious reflection. The proprietor of the most storied franchise in basketball was reportedly consumed by frustration, bitter, that the media lionized LeBron for his decision, while ignoring the allure and prestige her organization offered to recruit him. That level of disconnect is staggering to contemplate, but it pales in comparison to the festering wound left by the Russell Westbrook experiment, a scar that clearly never had the chance to properly heal. We all remember the architecture of that trade, a move designed to cement a super team dynasty and propel the Lakers into the stratosphere of invincibility. Instead, it engineered a catastrophic collapse, resulting in a dismal 33-49 record that left the organization in ruins, with everyone desperately looking for someone to blame. According to the dossier, the internal atmosphere turned toxic following that 2021 deal, pushing Jeanie to privately entertain the nuclear option, refusing to extend James's contract, or perhaps even trading the icon away. She reportedly navigated the corridors of the facility carrying the heavy burden of belief that LeBron refused to shoulder the weight of that failure, deflecting accountability when the walls started closing in.
Some of the folks that they got rid of, the Kyle Kuzmas of the world, and the ability to re-sign Alex Caruso and others, it had his fingerprints.
The concept of fingerprints is the critical key to decoding this entire saga. When you zoom out and analyze the roster construction during the LeBron era, the pattern becomes undeniable. His influence was woven into the DNA of nearly every transaction, a truth often whispered but rarely spoken aloud. They shipped away Kyle Kuzma, a homegrown talent with immense potential. They allowed Alex Caruso to defect to the Chicago Bulls without receiving a single asset in return, and they moved Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, all in a desperate bid to manifest the vision dictated by LeBron and the architects at Klutch Sports. And when those high-stakes gambles failed to pay dividends, collapsing under the weight of expectation, Jeanie apparently felt that LeBron skillfully sidestepped the fallout, leaving the front office to stand alone in the fire and absorb the public's vitriol. Yet, there is one final element that elevates this story from mere boardroom drama to something combustible and impossible to look away from. The core friction wasn't solely defined by the Westbrook catastrophe or the power struggle with Rich Paul. It was rooted in the arrival of Bronny James, as detailed in Holmes' extensive reporting. When the organization selected James's eldest son, Bronny, with the 55th overall pick in the 2024 draft, the world saw history. Jeanie, however, saw a favor. She privately remarked that James should have been overwhelmed with gratitude for such a monumental gesture, yet she felt a distinct, stinging absence of thanks. To her, drafting Bronny was an act of extreme loyalty and good faith, a gift that demanded reciprocation and appreciation, neither of which she felt she ever truly received from her superstar. When that sense of reciprocity didn't materialize from James, it didn't just sting, it poured gasoline on the simmering friction that was already straining the relationship. The moment that article hit the internet, it ignited a firestorm, tearing across the digital landscape with the kind of ferocity that consumes everything in its path. Jeanie Buss, a veteran of this industry, understood immediately that she was losing control of the story, and she knew she had to move with decisive speed to reclaim the narrative.
It's really not right, given all the great things LeBron has done for the Lakers, that he has to be pulled into my family.
She doubled down on that sentiment, insisting that any insinuation regarding a lack of gratitude on her part was not only factually incorrect, but a gross injustice to James's character and contribution. She took the public display of loyalty a step further, swapping her profile image on social media to a nostalgic shot of her and James embracing in the euphoria of the 2020 title run. In the modern era, that is a deliberate high-visibility signal, about as blatant a maneuver of crisis management as you will ever witness from the matriarch of a multi-billion-dollar empire. As for the king himself, he broke his silence 2 days later following a tough defeat to the Clippers, projecting the weary stoicism of a veteran who has navigated media storms for 20-plus years, noting simply that, while he viewed it one way, perception is always subjective. He reminded everyone that in this business, there are always two sides to every single coin, and the truth often lies somewhere in the spin. Then he dropped a line that only someone living under the microscope since age 16 could deliver with such deadpan sincerity, reminding the press that at 41 years old, his life revolves around recovery and watching golf, not gossip. He made it clear he has zero energy to waste on headlines, while his agent and longtime confidant Rich Paul took a far more aggressive stance, cutting through the noise with blunt force. Appearing on the Game Over podcast alongside Max Kellerman, Paul didn't mince words, asking rhetorically, who actually gives a damn about the rumors before labeling the entire narrative as nothing more than manufactured clickbait. He waved it off as targeted propaganda, a calculated attempt to fracture the locker room's chemistry, and he emphasized with absolute conviction that the internal vibe remained unshaken. He insisted that James and their entire inner circle have felt nothing but embrace since touching down in Los Angeles back in 2018. But despite the spin, the narrative had already sunk its teeth in. The headline was already written, circulating globally for the masses to dissect, analyze, and misunderstand. And it brought to the forefront a much darker, more complex question that has been bubbling beneath the shiny veneer of the Lakers organization for a long time. Is the father's love actually shielding or suffocating his son, Bronny? More importantly, has that unprecedented father-son dynamic begun to create genuine, structural fractures within the foundation of the franchise itself? To really grasp the magnitude of this so-called overprotection problem, you have to step back and contextualize the absolute hurricane that Bronny walked into the moment he declared for the league. He was never going to be just another anonymous second-round hopeful, grinding away in the shadows of a rebuilding roster where mistakes could be made in peace. He carries the blood and the name of the man who is arguably the greatest to ever lace them up, a shadow that stretches across the entire history of the sport. He was joining forces on the very same hardwood as his father, etching their names in the history books as the first ever father-son tandem in the existence of the National Basketball Association. The glare of the spotlight was destined to be blindingly intense, regardless of his performance, simply by virtue of his birthright. However, the sequence of events that unfolded amplified that pressure tenfold, turning a bright light into a searing laser focused on a 20-year-old kid. We have to look at the analytics, because the cold, hard data paints an undeniable picture of the mountain this young man has been attempting to climb since day one. Throughout his rookie campaign, he saw the floor in just 27 games, logging a scarce 6.7 minutes a night, while scraping together averages of 2.3 points, 0.7 boards, and 0.8 assists, all while shooting just 31.3% from the field. Those aren't the kind of statistics that build a case for belonging, and the critics, hungry for a narrative, were ruthless in highlighting those struggles at every single turn. Yet, this is where the narrative gains layers, becoming far more complex and nuanced than the screaming headlines and hot takes suggest. When you look at his tenure in the G League with the South Bay squad, you see a transformation. Bronny looked like an entirely different athlete. Down there, he was putting up 22.6 points, grabbing 5.4 rebounds, and dishing out 4.4 assists, while knocking down the deep ball at a 39% clip. It was proof of concept evidence that when the noise quiets down and the minutes are consistent, he possesses the genuine ability to operate at a high level. The chasm between that G League dominance and his struggles under the bright lights of the NBA was stark and undeniable. That disparity poured fuel on the fiery debate. Was he truly prepared for the biggest stage, or was his presence on the roster merely a byproduct of his last name and his father's immense leverage? And then, the atmosphere shifted entirely with a single, volatile incident that redefined the boundaries of this conversation. In March of 2025, Stephen A. Smith took to the airwaves on First Take and unleashed a passionate, almost desperate plea. He delivered a 4-minute monologue spoken directly to the king, virtually begging him to cease this experiment and stop feeding Bronny to the wolves of professional scrutiny. He implored him to shield his son from the relentless backlash over his performance. It was a pointed, emotional, and frankly, deeply uncomfortable segment to witness. That commentary clearly pierced the armor, because just a few days later, in the visceral setting of a live Lakers game, with cameras rolling and fans watching, LeBron James made a beeline for Stephen A. Smith on the sideline, closing the distance with purpose. He loomed over the broadcaster, using his physical stature to send a menacing signal, reportedly telling him to stop messing with his boy in no uncertain terms, a moment that instantly became a cultural lightning rod. This wasn't simply a case of a father standing up for his child. an instinct any parent can relate to on a human level. This was the most powerful athlete on the planet, leveraging his physical dominance and his immense status to broadcast a warning shot across the bow of the entire sports media industry. The subtext was crystal clear. If you come for my son, you have to answer to me personally. That message resonated instantly, and former NFL veteran Ryan Clark, speaking on the Pivot podcast, dissected the situation with a critical eye. Clark contended that James was miscalculating the optics entirely, noting that while LeBron James has historically displayed more poise and composure in the face of negativity than perhaps any athlete we have ever witnessed, this felt different. The underlying message you are sending to the next generation is essentially, I had to walk through the fire to get here, but you get the privilege of walking around it. It was a concise observation from Clark, yet it struck a nerve because it exposed a fundamental contradiction in how this legacy is being managed. You have to remember that LeBron James didn't just survive the scrutiny, he constructed an empire upon it. Every doubter and every critic became a necessary architect of his legendary status. He took the weight of the world, the venom from the stands, and converted it into pure rocket fuel, using it to sharpen his edge. Yet, when it comes to his own blood, the strategy has shifted entirely, moving from confrontation to avoidance. He is actively building a fortress around Bronny, protecting the boy from the exact same adversity that was essential in tempering the father into a man of steel. Clark went on to highlight the undeniable privileges inherited with the surname, the lucrative endorsements, the elevated draft status, and the doors that swing open before he even touches the handle. However, there is a concerted effort to sanitize the experience, stripping away the hardships and the grit that serve as the inevitable cost of admission for such a high-profile life. This wasn't an isolated opinion. A growing chorus of observers began to sense that something fundamental was being disrupted in the natural development process. Gilbert Arenas, a man who knows the league's inner workings, peeled back another layer of the narrative. He posited that the decision to bring the younger James to Los Angeles wasn't just about basketball, it was a calculated tactical move designed for insulation. As Arenas framed it, true security requires proximity. The only method to guarantee a buffer against the chaos of the league is to keep the boy within the castle walls, so to speak. In Los Angeles, the king holds the keys. The suggestion was that nowhere else in the professional landscape does a player possess such unilateral authority over the environment. Under any other franchise's banner, the father would lose his grip on the variables, he wouldn't be able to dictate the terms of engagement or manage the daily atmosphere surrounding his son. The rotation minutes, the assignments, the narrative spun by the press, all of these would be out of his hands. But in Los Angeles, where his gravitational pull has shaped the organization for seasons, the rules are different. Only there, in the shadow of Hollywood, could he engineer a sanctuary capable of filtering out the harsh realities that every other rookie must face alone. We cannot ignore the human cost, the invisible toll this public spectacle takes on the family unit. Savannah James, the matriarch who usually stays above the fray, offered a rare glimpse into that emotional burden. On an episode of her podcast, Everybody's Crazy, she dropped her guard, confessing that the relentless vitriol directed at her child had cut deeper than anyone realized. She revealed that she actually had to adopt meditation and breathing exercises simply to keep herself from losing composure and lashing out at the detractors. There is a breaking point for everyone, particularly when the target of the venom is your own flesh and blood, just kids trying to find their way. When you have a mother forcing herself to seek physiological mechanisms just to endure the commentary of faceless strangers, it becomes clear that we have crossed a line. This is no longer about jump shots or defensive schemes. The conversation has metastasized into something far more personal and toxic than standard sports debate. Yet, amidst this storm, the young man at the center of it all has displayed a stoicism that betrays his age, handling the pressure with a grace that few could muster.
We gotta, end the first stretch of the season off right, and hopefully come back the second stretch with a empty head and open mind, and ready to win some games.
It is the psychology of a professional who is fighting to silence the cacophony outside the arena and lock in on the variables within his grasp.
I feel different. Feel way more comfortable. My team, my teammates believe in me, my coaches believe in me. I've wanted. So, it's just good to get out there and take advantage of it.
Even when tasked with checking Victor Wembanyama, a distinct physical anomaly and the tallest presence in the game, there was no hesitation in the rookie's demeanor.
One of the smaller guys on the floor, guard the tallest guy in the league, so it's definitely a challenge, but I'm up for anything.
Regardless of the defensive stops or the minutes logged, the skepticism hangs over the arena like a heavy fog. We are forced to ask, would he even be standing on that parquet floor, matching up against a generational talent, if his jersey didn't read James? It is the specter that haunts every possession. Former Laker Kwame Brown, a man who knows something about the burden of expectation, has been vocal and relentless in his critique of the circumstances. He has condemned the entire arrangement as a display of nepotism, suggesting that this experiment reveals the limits of political maneuvering within the sport. The optics were not improved by the sneaker debacle in January 2026, which only served to pour gasoline on the fire. When the rookie stepped onto the court against Cleveland sporting a personal signature logo on his Nike LeBron Witness 9-player exclusives, it sent a specific message. The internet reacted with predicted fury, noting that veterans with far deeper resumes and proven accolades were still waiting for such branding distinctions. This aura of preferential treatment has stalked him since day one, casting a long shadow before the ink was even dry on his contract. Back in the Summer League of 2024, whispers emerged from the locker room, with an unnamed player voicing a deep-seated frustration. The sentiment was that the rookie was being handled as a separate entity, distinct from the collective, which bred resentment and fractured the delicate chemistry of the squad. For a franchise that prides itself on culture, that is a damning indictment and a dangerous precedent to set. When the men you go to war with perceive that the playing field is tilted before the opening tip, it erodes trust in the mission. It establishes a toxic dynamic that is nearly impossible to repair, poisoning the collective water supply. So, we circle back to the core inquiry. Is the father suffocating the son with protection? The answer varies wildly depending on your vantage point and the values you prioritize in this discussion. From the perspective of a parent, the impulse is primal and understandable. You want to stand between your child and the cruelty of a world that loves to tear people down. It becomes infinitely heavier when you factor in the digital coliseum, where millions of voices amplify that animosity, seemingly finding purpose solely in dismantling a young man's confidence from behind a screen. Yet, for the fundamentalists who view the game through a lens of meritocracy, there is a valid argument that this shield is actually a sword, one that might be cutting too deep by denying Bronny the essential, jagged experience of sinking or swimming entirely on his own strength. It is the exact crucible LeBron himself was forced to endure at 18 years old in Cleveland, standing alone at center court while carrying the crushing expectations of the entire basketball universe on his teenage shoulders. This brings us to the precipice of the unknown for both the James bloodline and the Lakers organization. The dust settles, but the path forward remains obscured, forcing us to ask where we actually stand in this narrative. We are looking at a fracture in the foundation. An explosive report has peeled back the curtain to reveal a simmering, uncomfortable friction between the ownership suite and the icon they built their modern identity around. We are deep in the throes of a philosophical battle regarding paternal instinct versus professional integrity, a debate over whether a father's protection is stifling a son's growth that has held the basketball community captive for more than 12 months. Caught in the middle is a storied franchise attempting to chart a course for both tomorrow and the next decade, all while maneuvering through perhaps the most intricate and emotionally volatile interpersonal labyrinth the National Basketball Association has ever witnessed. The inquiry itself is deceptively straightforward, yet the resolution is layered with nuance and complexity. We are left wondering what the next chapter truly holds for everyone involved. To understand the macro, we must first analyze the micro, starting with LeBron, whose circumstances, despite the noise, distill down to a surprisingly clear set of variables once you strip away the emotion. Brian Windhorst articulated this with surgical precision on national television, outlining a trifecta of diverging paths. The first avenue is a departure entering free agency to take his talents to a new destination. That stands as the primary alternative. He could sever ties with Los Angeles completely. embarking on a mercenary quest for one final ring in a city where the roster architecture is already primed for a deep postseason run.
My attitude is if you really want to win, how about going back to Cleveland? Now, I'm not one to advise people to leave places like LA and Miami for Cleveland.
When you remove the sentiment and analyze the board strictly from a tactical perspective, the basketball rationale behind such a reunion is not just sound, it is undeniable. The Cavaliers possess Donovan Mitchell, a dynamic force capable of shattering defenses at will, alongside Evan Mobley, who has evolved into one of the most multifaceted and impactful big men the modern game has to offer. Even in his absence, that squad has already established itself as a formidable power near the summit of the Eastern Conference hierarchy.
There is no doubt that the Cleveland Cavaliers would have been the favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference, which would have given LeBron James a last chance at a championship.
It would place him shoulder to shoulder with the fundamental greatness of Tim Duncan and bring him within a single title of matching the ghostly shadow of Michael Jordan. For an athlete who has spent his entire existence meticulously curating his history and measuring his reflection against the giants of the past, the implications are staggering. Whether he chooses to vocalize that ambition to the press or keeps it internal, the gravitational pull of that possibility is impossible to ignore.
The second thing he can do is he can stay at the Lakers, but he's got to take a pay cut. The Lakers currently spend $120 million on Luka, LeBron, and Reeves. All three of them are perimeter-based ball handlers who don't defend.
This creates a fundamental structural imbalance in the roster's DNA, a defensive void that raw talent alone simply cannot overcome. When the three most expensive assets on your payroll are all players who require possession of the basketball to operate at peak efficiency, you have a redundancy issue. And when those same stars fail to provide elite stops on the opposite end of the floor, the equation collapses. The numbers do not balance, and inevitably, the structure must be broken to be fixed. The front office has signaled a shift in philosophy, prioritizing roster malleability over handing LeBron another maximum deal. The message is clear. If the king wishes to keep his throne in Los Angeles, it will not be at the exorbitant financial valuation he has commanded for the better part of 20 years. Then we arrive at the Third Avenue, the most definitive and absolute conclusion of them all. He could simply walk away. Retirement. Those are the only cards left on the table. Yet, there is an undercurrent here that makes this saga far more profound than the typical contractual standoff between a superstar and a franchise. It inextricably involves the fate of Bronny. The prevailing perception across the league is that the son's presence on the roster is merely an extension of the father's leverage, a package deal. A chorus of analysts and insiders have forecasted a brutal timeline where Bronny's tenure in the National Basketball Association expires the very second his father exits the stage. That is a devastatingly heavy burden for a 21-year-old still attempting to find his rhythm and identity within the professional ranks. However, beneath the skepticism, there is tangible evidence suggesting Bronny possesses the tools to forge his own legacy, one that endures long after his father hangs up the jersey. The statistics from his sophomore campaign reveal a legitimate evolution. Across 29 contests this season, he is posting numbers that demand respect, shooting 40% from the floor, and connecting on an impressive 40.7% from beyond the arc. That efficiency represents a quantum leap forward from the struggles and inconsistencies that plagued his rookie initiation. When assigned to the G League, he has transcended mere competence to display dominance, averaging 22.6 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 4.4 assists every night. Respected voices like Dave McMenamin have gone on record projecting that, should this developmental arc continue, he could cement himself as a viable rotation fixture by the midpoint of the season. The vision is for him to evolve into a defensive-minded catalyst, an energy guard modeled after relentless competitors like Davion Mitchell or T.J. McConnell. When you strip away the hype and listen to the young man speak, it becomes clear that he possesses a high basketball IQ. He understands the assignment and accepts the specific responsibilities required to survive at this level.
And that's my, role that I want to excel at, especially on this team. We have a lot of guys, Luka, LeBron, and AR, so those guys can go get buckets and whatever we need.
He possesses a quiet understanding of the hierarchy here, fully grasping that the heavy offensive lifting is reserved for the Titans already established on this roster. Instead, he has carved out a different kind of purpose, rooting his identity in the grit of defense, relentless energy, and the discipline to make the correct read every single second he steps onto the hardwood.
But, they need guys like myself, Vando, Jake, guys that can, defend and, definitely get more satisfaction out of that.
Possessing that level of introspection and maturity is almost unheard of for a player of his age, particularly for someone who spent his entire childhood watching his father rule the league from the comfort of courtside seats. Even LeBron has taken a moment to openly reflect on the situation, acknowledging his profound respect for the way his son has navigated the absolute hurricane of scrutiny surrounding this entire journey.
My sense is that he's better than I would have been in that situation. 20,000 fans screaming my name to get in the game.
We are talking about LeBron James, a Titan who has performed in front of sold-out arenas during the highest-stakes battles on the global stage for more than 2 consecutive decades. Yet, he openly admitted that his own son navigates the crushing pressure and suffocating expectations with a grace that he himself would not have possessed at that tender age. This is far more than just a proud father offering empty praise. This is a veteran who has witnessed everything the game has to offer, recognizing that his child possesses a rare and genuine fortitude within his spirit.
As parents, you try to put them in a position that's at one point throughout their lives that maybe that dream can become a reality, if that's what they want to do.
When you strip away the noise, that is precisely what this entire sprawling, complex, and emotionally charged narrative boils down to at its absolute core. Isn't it simply the story of a father striving to provide his son with every conceivable opportunity to find success, both within the boundaries of the basketball court and in life itself? There are those who observe this dynamic and label it as overprotection, while others witness the exact same actions and define it as unconditional love and deeply devoted parenting.
To see that he is in the midst of his reality and his dream at the same time is just super cool for a parent.
And to observe, how he carries himself when the cameras aren't rolling is even more gratifying. When LeBron was asked about the comments from Bronny's middle school teacher regarding his son's selflessness, a profound quality that has absolutely nothing to do with the game of basketball and everything to do with the content of his character, LeBron immediately deflected the praise, giving all the credit to one specific person without a single moment of hesitation.
Well, Savannah is the rock in our household, and I spent a lot of time on the road, obviously for my career, and but Savannah sets down the law.
Then LeBron tied the entire sentiment together with a message that extends far beyond the hardwood, speaking to something much deeper and more universal regarding the
because it don't cost you a dime to be nice to people.
The debate regarding overprotection surrounding LeBron and Bronny isn't fading away anytime soon, and LeBron's future with the Lakers, whether he stays at a discount, decides to return to Cleveland, or finally hangs up his sneakers for good, remains genuinely one of the most monumental questions looming over professional sports. Yet, through all the deafening noise, the manufactured drama, the endless hot takes, and the whispers from anonymous sources, and the relentless social media pile-ons, what remains is simply a father who brought his son into the family business because fulfilling that shared vision was his lifelong dream. We see a son who is grinding every single day to prove he belongs on his own merits, and a family unit that absolutely refuses to let the outside world shatter what they have built together. Regardless of whether you believe LeBron is right or wrong in how he has maneuvered through these complexities, and whether you are convinced Bronny earned his spot or was handed it on a silver platter, you are compelled to respect one undeniable truth. The man has never once wavered in his commitment to putting his family above all else. He places them above his legacy, above the money, above public opinion, and truly above everything else. And in a league and a world that ruthlessly chews people up and spits them out without a second thought, that unwavering loyalty might just be the most impressive thing about LeBron James. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to click on these cards for more.